Hi, everyone out there in streaming world. I'm Evan Shapiro, your media cartographer and the host of Streaming Media Connect 2024. Welcome back to day 3 of programming. We're on our third great day of programming. There's been 2 great days so far. Those sessions will be up on Streaming Media's YouTube channel later this week or early next week. Steve will put a link into the chat. Thank you for coming to Licensing, Scale, and the State of Sports Streaming, a really timely panel with a great group of speakers and a really knowledgeable moderator, Matt. We'll bring them up in just 1 second, but before that, a little housekeeping. If you were the first to name the band, hint, and the song or the music that was just playing, and you're the first and you are here at the end, you will get a $50 gift card from Amazon given to you by Streaming Media Connect. Also, if you come to 2 or more sessions during the course of Streaming Media Connect 2024, you're automatically, I don't know how they're doing this, but you're automatically entered to win an Ozbot PTZ 4K streaming camera. Really cool new device out there. You'll be notified by email if you won after that. Little bit of organization here. Put your questions in the Q&A. That's what the Q stands for. Put your comments or links in the chat. Also, look to the chat for important links. So you'll see links for the bios of the panelists and the moderator, but you're also going to see the agenda for the rest of Streaming Media Connect 2024. You'll also see a link to the agenda and a registration page for Streaming Media NYC, which is an amazing event we're throwing here in New York, May 20th through the 22nd, 3 great days of programming. I'm hosting, I'm chairing, I'm curating it. The link to the agenda will be in the chat. Go look at it. It's an amazing 3 days of programming. Steve will also give you a code for a discount pass. And look at the agenda. We're still filling seats on some of these panels. There's going to be an actual debate track with high school debate club rules. So if you want to be a part of the fun, reach out to Steve or myself, but also sign up, get the 25% discount and join us here in New York for what's going to be an amazing event. All right, I think that is all of my business work. Sorry about that. Thanks for attending this great panel, Licensing, Scale, and the State of Sports Streaming. I'm going to bring our really great moderator to the stage here, Matt Del Percio from Altman Solomon, a firm that knows a lot about this space. Matt, take it away. Good luck and break a leg.
Great. Thank you so much, Evan. Good morning, everyone. Very excited to be here with you all today, moderating this panel. Going to go ahead and just share my screen here. So just to tee things up, Evan covered our topic. You probably read the description. Just in terms of an agenda, we're going to do quick intros, and then we're going to jump right in. We're going to set the stage with just a couple of high-level slides just to set the context, and then we'll jump right into hearing from our great panelists about the current state of sports streaming, as well as the outlook. What are opportunities? What are challenges in the world of sports streaming? And we are thrilled to have Julie and Chance here with us. Julie is the global head of sports for Amazon Web Services. She leads AWS's global sports strategy, driving innovation in sport, from data and analytics to virtualized live remote production to next-gen DTC offerings and more. Chance Mason is the VP of Global Go-to-Market Strategy for ViewLift, which is a leading OTT platform provider offering end-to-end solutions for video streaming, monetization, and more. I am Matt Del Percio, as Evan said. I'm a director with Altman Solon. We are the largest global strategy consulting firm that is focused exclusively on the TMT sectors. We've got 600 plus professionals in 13 offices globally. My role is to work with sports rights owners, media companies, technology providers, and investors, and I also co-lead our annual global sports survey. Before we jump in, Julie and Chance, if you are able to hop off on video here and just maybe give the audience a bit more of a background, and then we'll jump in.
Sure. Well, I'm happy to go first. Julie Souza. You pretty much explained what I do at AWS, which is really excited working with customers in the sports space to drive innovation, whether or not that's around streaming platforms and distribution and production of sports content, data and analytics, which is so much a part of the sport vernacular, and I think only going to increasingly be the case. smart venue solutions, fan engagement, fan analytics, lots of different things, generative AI, how does that apply to the sports space? So keeping our eyes on where the puck is going, so to speak. So I'll let Chance introduce himself.
Thank you, Julie. So thank you for having me on this panel. Chance Mason, I've been in this industry for over 15 years, everything from the point of acquisition of content to low latency and making sure latency is in order to OTT for the last 15 years on the distribution side, monetization side, et cetera. So excited about the panel.
Wonderful. Yeah, excited to have you both. So maybe just to start off, I'm just going to flip through a couple of pages just to set the stage here, and then we'll jump into some panel discussions here. So just starting with a very simplified view of the current video ecosystem, if we just think about the video value chain from creation through aggregation to distribution, obviously a key trend has been the disruption that has been caused to the sort of the traditional linear video value chain by direct-to-consumer offerings and other internet enabled video services. And what that has resulted in is a variety of general entertainment and sports-specific streaming services and networks available for sports fans and consumers to be able to consume sports. So the landscape has become increasingly competitive and increasingly fragmented for sports. What we also see is that when looking at how consumers are actually accessing live TV and actually accessing live sports, we find that there's roughly 26% or roughly a quarter this is from an annual consumer video survey that we've run for 14 straight years. About a quarter of respondents actually do not have access to live TV. So these are households that only have access to streaming. You've got about another 12% of those households that are really just using an over-the-air antenna to get access to live TV, and then about 63% of respondents or households that are subscribed to either a traditional or a virtual pay TV service. Not surprisingly, I think everyone is very aware of the trend in cord cutting around pay TV. So the left-hand side of this chart is showing residential pay TV penetration historically by quarter. So currently we're just north of 60% of US households that actually have a pay TV subscription. And when we look forward, a variety of forecasts that we've done and others, that trend is expected to continue. Why is sports important? Why is live content important? Well, historically, sports has really kept consumers subscribing and paying for live video services. This is from a survey we did. It's a bit dated. This is from 2021, but the trend still holds. You tend to see people that watch sports have a higher likelihood to subscribe to pay TV and to actually spend more time watching sports on video services. And that is why you see last year roughly $26 billion spent on live sports rights here in the US. So this chart showing the amount of spending that major broadcasters have spent on the top 30 sports properties, in addition to regional sports rights and streaming rights of about another $3 billion off to the right there. So not surprisingly, a lot of money, a lot of spending going into sports rights. And one trend that we've also seen is the shift from live sports and news being available exclusively on linear pay TV to now being available on both linear pay TV as well as subscription services. So what Amazon's been doing with the NFL, what Paramount Plus and Peacock have been doing with European soccer and other sports, you're starting to see more and more sports available outside of the traditional linear pay TV ecosystem. The NFL, just as one example, you've seen some of their major broadcast partners making those NFL games available across a number of streaming platforms. And finally, if we just look historically, this was a great chart put together by Sports Business, just historically looking at the growing number of sports streaming options available for fans, many of which are being powered by technology partners such as AWS and ViewLift. And so one of the things that we're going to talk about today, in addition to sort of the current landscape, are some of the key trends and some of the key areas of innovation in sports media, whether you're talking about production, distribution, or even on the consumption side. And again, it's partners like AWS and ViewLift that are enabling a lot of this innovation within the industry. So with that rapid introduction, I wanted to sort of pose the first question, maybe to you, Julie. Maybe you could just sort of give us a quick summary. What is your view on sort of the current state of sports and sports media? Obviously, a lot going on. I just hit on some of the key trends, but from where you sit on the AWS side, what's your take on the current state of sports and sports media?
Yeah, it's everything that's old is new again, right? So we were talking previously, you had these bundle packages, it was called cable, where we got all of our sports content and other content as well. And then you saw this, proliferation into these standalone products. And now we're seeing it swing back a little bit more to the aggregation side of things. The fact of the matter is, sports is the last appointment viewing left on the planet, I think, right? And so you started talking about some of those statistics. In 2022, 19 of the top 20 watched programs in the US were 92 of the top 100 were sporting events, right? So that just shows the power of sports to bring eyeballs to a platform. And I don't think that's necessarily going to change, right? But I do think that, making it easier for consumers to find the content is certainly something that we're seeing folks make a move in that space right now. I also think when you talk about the rights fees accompanied with sports, the economics are going to matter. I mean, we saw the implosion of regional sports networks in the United States, and they've got to sort of figure out how to right size that so that it's sustainable. And I think what you're going to see is, with this inflection point, leagues that have local distribution rights, parlayed or offered to their teams, and that's the NFL. I'm sorry, it's the NHL, NBA, and Major League Baseball. Those teams are starting to think, okay, if I don't have that big money RSN paycheck anymore, is there value in going direct and owning that direct relationship? I mean, you showed all of the different players in this space, right? The content owners, the aggregators, the distributors. I mean, and look, when I was at ESPN, someone used to ask me, are you scared of Amazon getting into the mix? Are you scared of Apple getting into the mix? And my answer then was no. I'm more scared of the teams and leagues deciding to go direct, right? So that's a question that hangs out. And I don't know, given the volume of dollars we're talking about, I don't foresee that happening immediately, but I think you're going to start, and we've already started seeing folks started treading into that space a little bit.
Absolutely. Chance, maybe same question to you. Anything to maybe layer on to what Julie said? I mean, I know one thing that you and I spoke about during our pre-session was some of the challenges around accessibility of live sports, kind of knowing where to watch the game you want to watch, which platform, do I have access to it? Do I have to pay for it incrementally? Is it already included in a service or not? But from where you sit on the ViewLift side, what's your take on the kind of the current state of sports and sports media?
Yeah, I mean, it's currently chaotic, right? It's chaotic for the viewer. We don't know where all these sports rights are going to end from a negotiation standpoint, right? So if somebody's got a crystal ball, I would love to see into it, right? Because we're cutting deals at values we've never cut deals before. And will the business models that are being pushed to the consumer be able to support those deals? Or are there going to be ancillary ways to make revenue that supplement the value that we're putting on those licenses? I do believe that the teams will go direct. They're realizing the value that they have with the consumer, and they want to build a direct relationship with the consumer. And not only, when I say consumer, it's not just the consumer on the digital side, it's the consumer that's also participating in venue. Those consumers are starting to blend, right? The in-venue consumer and the OTT consumer now have ways via technology to blend that in-venue experience as well as that out-of-venue experience. And there's a lot of different ways in technology to do that. The other thing I would say is, to your point earlier, right? I'm a big women's basketball fan. My daughter plays basketball. Caitlin Clark, amazing player for Iowa, just broke the all-time scoring record. She's just an amazing lady. And we didn't get to watch the game. Why? Because we didn't have access to the platform that game was specifically on, right? She happens not to travel through Atlanta for the second half of the season, so we don't get to see her after she breaks the record. Do you sign up And do you churn out? Well, we had already done that, unfortunately, at the Kansas City game, right? And so we weren't going to use the same email addresses. So I think that there's a lot that's going to play out, right? The RSMs, the Valleys, all that's playing out. We see clients like Vegas Golden Knights that are going direct and see the value of having a direct relationship and don't want to be dependent on those minimum guarantees. There may be other ways to monetize that. So I think, licensed, super chaotic, teams are selling at, values that have never been seen before. Rights are being bought at never, seen before rates. And the new entries are back to where they were in the early 2000s, right? This is just another maturity curve. We've seen this before. We saw it with cable. We saw it in the early 2000s with OTT. There were tons of, we didn't call them fast. We just call them server-side playlist linear channels. Now they're fast channels as well. So I think there's a lot out there. The most important thing, though, is the consumer, right? And making sure that the consumer can get access to the content they want and need at some pricing threshold that they can afford.
Yeah. Great perspectives there. And maybe we're talking a bit about kind of the current state of sports and sports media, generally speaking, maybe to narrow in a little bit. And if we think about the current state of sports streaming, so I highlighted a couple of slides showing some of the trends in certain types of sports becoming more available across streaming, new streaming services that are sports specific that have come to market, teams and leagues looking to go direct via direct to consumer services. So if we think about what's happening specifically in the streaming sports space, maybe Julie, I'll come back to you, both on the demand side. So if you think about sort of changing consumer behavior, but also on the supply side in terms of new entrants, new innovations, including things that AWS and Viewlift are doing. Can you maybe talk about, from where both of you sit, what are you seeing happening in the streaming sports space on both the consumer and on the supply side?
Well, I think I'll go back to, I generally say we've done a really good job with streaming of turning the internet into cable, which is not the point or the value prop of, and doesn't really necessarily exploit all of the native capabilities of those platforms, right? So where I see opportunity, and this is sort of picking up Chance a little bit, okay, you're not getting that paycheck necessarily from the RSN, but can you, the data, there's a value to having that data about your fans, and also can you monetize in different ways, right? So yeah, there's subscription models. I would love to see, I don't know why we're not experimenting with micropayments, right? Because Chance, they probably could have got you to watch that Iowa-Michigan women's basketball game if you didn't have to subscribe, but you maybe would have been willing to spend whatever, $10 to see that game, right? So I still think that there's an opportunity to play with the pricing models there and get a little bit more flexible, right? I don't think we need to just adopt a single subscription model because that's the way it's been done. And that we're also borrowing from cable, right? And then think about all of the things that we do on a second screen when we're watching a live sporting event, right? I'm chatting with my friend. I'm doing all these other things that truthfully can, and in my opinion, should be built into the live streaming experience, right? So I should be able to choose my camera angle, choose my audio feed, choose my level of augmentation. Do I want like a Prime Vision stats overlay? Do I want, do I want some sort of Snapchat filter on what I'm watching? Do I want the Big City Greens or the Toy Story or whatever version of this game, right? Can I, follow my fantasy stats? Can I buy tickets to the next game? Can I buy my favorite player's jersey? Order Uber Eats 20 minutes before halftime? Take a poll? Like place a real money bet. All of these things. Can we start building in to a much more robust and interactive, engaging, and personalized viewing experience? That I think is, well, it's one step away from Holy Grail for me, because I think those things are sort of server side, things that we're saying, okay, pick this option. Ultimately, for me, like I don't have control issues, but I really do want control over my viewing experience. And I want to watch a game the way I want to watch the game. So can I set this up to say, hey, if I'm watching an NBA game, I want to be prompted for prop bets anytime somebody's on the free throw line. I want all my fantasy stats updated in an L bar. Definitely prompt me to order Uber Eats 20 minutes before halftime and open up a chat thread so I can talk smack with my friends, right? And then we're going from what has historically been a fairly passive viewing experience. You know, you walk by what we historically called the best available screen, which was the 65-inch or whatever, and you're going into much more of an active viewing experience because you're engaged with your content. And if you're holding it in your hands or it's on your lap, I would argue that's a much more engaged consumer than somebody who's walking past it in the living room. And then I think the market needs to adjust there too, from a CPM perspective, to you know, the whole what was it, linear dollars, digital dimes, or whatever that phrase was, right? I don't think they should be dimes. I think those should be big dollars, right? So I think there's a lot of different parts in this ecosystem that can evolve, and I think they will. We're just still at the very sort of beginning stages of it.
Yes, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it depends on which lens you view it from, right? Like if you view it from the consumer lens, then it's all about personalization, right? That's the next phase. Julie's hitting on it. Personalization, personalization, personalization. You know, whether I follow 5 different leagues, 3 different leagues, whatever it may be, my experience has to be personalized because there's just too much noise around everything that's going on, right? I think, and then fan engagement, right? You're going to need the engagement tools, the fantasy. This turns into a fantasy on a digital screen and it all blends together, right? Unique interactions, people that like the same player, people that like the same teams, those kind of things. But there's just so much content that's out there. The personalization is going to be the absolute key to keeping the viewer sticky to the content. 100%, because they're just too distracted, right? They're watching on a 65 and they're on this, they need to be able to interact both ways. If you look at it from the provider standpoint, that's where the technology is available. AWS is doing some amazing things with AI. When you look at the NFL, right? You get to the Thursday broadcast on Prime, you have multiple options to consume from. However, is a lot of that technology for the teams and the coaches so that they can make real-time decisions based on real-time data and real-time stats? Or does a consumer really want to see that as an overlay as a part of their entertainment experience? I think that's yet to be seen, right? Which one, and if there's a demographic that goes one way or another, but I think it's 2 different lenses, right? And we just got to make sure that the cost of the lens for the provider doesn't get pushed down to the consumer, where there isn't the ability to aggregate and get access to different content from other leagues or teams, to where we get to the point where we're spending so much money on technology that the consumer, as we've seen, the prices are rising. They're not going down, right? They're introducing new business models like AVOD because they can't increase price ranges. So the prices can't continue to rise year over year or every 2 years because we're pushing innovation. So there's got to be a balance between innovation and there's got to be a balance to what the consumer can accept. So I think there's 2 different lenses.
Do you think, Chance, I'm sorry, not to interrupt you on this, but do you think that there will be, like, I agree, you can't have these just ever escalating subscription rates, but to the extent that you allow that personalization functionality, doesn't it give a little bit more ammunition to like tiered structures and stuff, so the people who want to do the deep dives or have a certain level of personalization, maybe they're willing to pay more for it, but you're not necessarily putting that burden on the entire base? I mean,
assuming they can get, I agree on that, assuming they can get access to the content that they're looking for, right? That the rights don't stand in the way of that consumer experience. And today the rights stand in the way, right? There's a league that you can watch on 4 different platforms, and it's Monday at one place, maybe it's Thursday at place, maybe it's Sunday at place, maybe there's midweek, right? And the consumer is very confused. And again, this is just a maturity curve, and entertainment companies are shifting to direct to consumer companies that were just content producers before. So all of that, right? Infrastructure providers like AWS are now media and entertainment companies, right? You can develop virtual production studios like Monumental Sports. They not only have ownership of multiple teams, but they built a studio. They bought an RSN. Now they're an entertainment company. They have a linear channel. They have all their sports teams under one umbrella, right? They built out a state-of-the-art studio. In those cases, those teams, the Utah Jazz, doing the same thing, right? And so they're becoming their own media and entertainment companies, which is what some teams want to build that D2C relationship with, and they're putting in the infrastructure to do that.
I want to maybe just come back, Chance, to something you said earlier, which is, it's all about personalization. And as a consumer and a fan, I can think about ways that I've personalized my viewing experience. So for example, watching the Manning cast version of Monday Night Football as opposed to the traditional broadcast, or if I'm watching MLB.TV, I have the option to maybe overlay some more advanced statistics, right? Spin rate on a pitcher's pitches, or launch angle or velocity off of a bat. So there's a number of examples of how fans are able to get a more personalized viewing experience. But I'm kind of curious from both of your perspectives, to the extent you can share, are there other sort of features or functionality in the works that are not yet sort of mainstream or not yet out there, that we can start thinking about? Like, are there other ways that personalization can be brought to the viewing experience that, we as sort of typical sports fans are not yet thinking about, but suppliers and partners and innovators like yourselves are already working on? Is there anything that either of you can share in terms of potentially future forms of personalization that are in the works?
Chance, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I think Julie covered it well. I don't think the personalization is so much a limitation of technology that's available to us. It's crunching the data and then providing it in a way that's consumer friendly, and then educating the consumer on how to get. We need to do as much personalization as we can for them, right? Like based on their viewing habits, based on their trends, based on how they interact with commerce and overlays, and they buy a jersey associated with their favorite players. We're obviously collecting all that data and using that to create our own personalization approach. But the presentation of the data is, and the presentation of the personalization definitely has a lot of work to be done. And it's not the tech as much as it is the figuring out what's the best consumer experience. And there's probably multiple versions of that.
For sure. And I would think, that what we're talking about, surfacing those, whether it's content recommendation, like you're talking about, their chance in getting the algorithms in play and the machine learning to be able to surface, the content that's going to take a fan down the rabbit hole, so to speak, who wants to go there. I think that is certainly something that will continue to be optimized and attention focused on it. But I do think there are other ways of personalizing in a way that, again, drives value for those that are, putting these platforms out there. I think, shoppable video, that's been around forever, but I think it hasn't quite, hit mainstream yet. But I can see that, if you were a Chiefs fan and they won in the Super Bowl, there should have been a one-stop shop to order your championship T-shirt or hat. That I bet that would have been a really nice e-commerce boost to be able to have that happen, while the confetti's raining down, right? So I do think there are ways of leaning into this content and figuring out how do we put a few more controls in the fans, in the fans' hands, so that they can really lean into that content. I do think the data is really interesting. And so where I'm saying, yes, a more immersive experience and personalization and monetizable one would maybe commerce in that situation. It could also be, understanding what the betting lines are and trying to figure out how do we, connect to your, betting app of choice in some sort of deep linking sort of way and let you transact while you're watching a game or for pivotal moments within a game, right? Understanding what you want, who you're viewing with, right? Because if you're watching an NHL game by yourself, like I was watching the Spitting Chicklets broadcast of an NHL game the other day, which, I don't normally necessarily, well, it was a first time for them, but, that was it was an alternate broadcast I got to watch. And then I was amused watching it, right? When the NHL did a Big City Greens version, so that augmentation using that data and replacing the players with characters from Big City Greens, they found that alternate broadcast resonated remarkably with tween girls, right? So Chance, your daughter, like, all that, and that's amazing, because do you think the NHL was targeting that market? Absolutely not, right? Are they pretty psyched that they got a bunch of tween girls leaning in on hockey? Absolutely, right? So I think that experimentation lets you attract new audiences too, which I think is important because as technology evolves, you want to meet the fan where they are and create fans maybe where they are too, right? So I think
And to
there's
add
still
on
so
that,
much room.
yeah, there is so much room, but I think it's the technology is there. It's how do we harness the technology, not make it too heavy on cost, not make the consumer so confused that their ADD kicks in and now they're down this rabbit hole over here and they forgot about the game, right? And so it's balancing all of how far you want to take a consumer and which path you want to take that consumer down. And understanding that there's so many, like they talk about in the workforce, right? There's like 4 generations in the workforce now. It's the same thing with sports. You've got many different generations that are viewing sports content, and they have different ways in which they like to view it, right? The younger generations are short form content, right? They're used to this, that, the other. My daughter, she just take the highlights of a game from Duke basketball and boom, 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 boom. She's seen the game. Right? She has no interest in sitting down. She doesn't want to see the overlay stats. She just wants to see the end and get a slate that tells me the scores, but just let me get the highlights and I'm done. Versus me, I want to sit down, watch the game, enjoy it, cheer, do this, that, the other. So we've got our own challenges of tackling the experience for each of those generations. And some of those generations, if we over customize their experience, we can confuse them and they get scared from a technology perspective that we know too much about them. And then the younger generation is like, customize it to where I don't see anything that has nothing to do with exactly what I want and make it as short as possible. So it is a challenge, right? In understanding the audience, but the demographics are across the board that we're trying to get sports in front of. Women's volleyball, right? Merging leagues all over the place, right? There's Love B. I see it all over Atlanta when I'm taking my daughter to travel basketball, right? There's all we already have in Atlanta a professional volleyball team, right? But there's all these new entrants. Pro Box TV is going to be a new entrant into boxing and combat sports, right? You saw how fast PFL caught up with UFC, in my opinion, right? Like they've really made a monumental move. So I think some of these new entrants are going to change up some of the negotiations and the licensing rates as well, long term.
I also think you hit on a point there too, which is effectively pulling data out of these platforms from a fan perspective so that we can figure out who wants what and surface things to them. Because, you said Chance sort of pulling people, they go down the rabbit hole and they forget the live game. Do we care if that's what they want and they're still spending eyeballs on, putting their eyeballs on our content and going down that rabbit hole? Maybe we don't, right? And we've figured out that's how they want to consume sport as a particular individual consumer or a persona, and so I think that's the whole point, is how do you meet them where they are? How do we take the data about viewing habits or people similar to them and then surface things that allow them to spend more time and engage and really express their fandom and develop an affinity and an avidity for sports? Because that at the end of the day is like what keeps this whole engine running, right? This insatiable demand for sports content and fandom. And so we have to continue to evolve in how that's being created. And I think these streaming platforms can play a really big role in doing that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that, right? And one point I'll also make is we can't completely separate just the streaming from the traditional broadcast, right? These things are going to exist for a very long time together, right? And we are using and should be using technology that not only enhances the experience for the OTT audience in a way that's unique, that can't be done on traditional television, but as we enhance those assets via AI, via whatever tool or partner or vendor or whatever, however you want to call it, used to enhance those assets, there's still a lot of things that we can do with that enhancement of that asset that benefits broadcast, right? And benefits linear TV, right? Whether it's commerce oriented, whether it's better metadata, whether it's better clipping, et cetera. So the innovations that are happening in OTT, if they're done right, are going back and being applied to linear to keep that experience as interactive as possible. We just get to take it a step further over here. But as marketers, when we present this personalization in these 5 areas, as marketers, we know scientifically how to drive people down rabbit holes in our best interest for monetization and for those type of things. Just like Instagram, right? You're 30 minutes in and you're like, look up and it's like, oh, the sun just went down and I didn't even notice, right? Like, so we have to be careful not to drive a user down that rabbit hole that's for the best interest of the monetization, but make sure we don't lose what they came for, which was the content, right?
Yeah. And maybe I noticed we've got a couple of questions that came in the chat, and two of them were similar and related to personalization, really around language. So the questions are, can direct-to-consumer streams be optimized by language to reach, I believe, the expat viewership groups? And then a related question, do you see real-time AI-based language translation with visual facial manipulation more appropriate becoming the norm? If so, when do you think it will become table stakes? So maybe
It's
just
happening now. Like it's happening now, right? And this is a really great use case for generative AI, actually, right? So you can right now there, products out there. AWS certainly has one with Transcribe, which is with Translate, which translates commentary or whatever. But that doesn't necessarily, sports is so rich in colloquialisms and particular vocabulary that it's not going to be a straight translation from language to language. So where you get into generative AI use cases is to say, okay, let's take this broadcast and this commentary, and we don't have the resources or the talent necessarily to call this game or provide commentary for this game in every language where we want our content distributed. So can we use Gen AI to learn, okay, this is how a game is called, but then now let's actually create commentary that's going to resonate in Latvia, which is different than how it's going to resonate in Brazil, which is different than how it's going to resonate in Finland, for example, right? So I think we at AWS are actively involved in those use cases right now and building that out. And I think that just helps with the democratization of sport too, that you can, at scale, reach a global audience in a way that is going to be germane and relevant to them. And they're not, having to hear it in a different language or hear it, verbatim transcribed in a way or translated in a way that's just not landing. I think it's interesting too, is you're talking about text there, but when you get to, actual voice commentary too, the other challenge that we're working on right now is you cannot say, and there was a goal. Right? It's got to be goal. You've got to scream it, right? There's got to be the emotion and the intonation. And so that's the part that is also a task for generative AI. And we're seeing a lot of experimentation in that space too, because it's got to be authentic. You've got to capture the emotion and the drama of sport. And if we're falling short, then I wouldn't do it, right? You need to be honest and and commit to the ethos of what that content is.
Yeah, it's already happening, right? The people that ask that question, it is absolutely happening. The technology is available to do it. It's all about accuracy, and it's all about carrying over the energy that comes from a sports announcer, which is so unique. And they become special announcers. They become, essentially celebrities in their own world, right? An announcer is a celebrity. Dick Vitale, me growing up, Dick Vitale, you followed, right? Everybody actually used his terms. He created terminology that didn't exist, that was common within the basketball world. That is hard to translate into other languages via technology and the way in which he does it. That's going to happen. It's just going to take time. If you look at the US Open, you see these audio boxes of all these different languages being translated simultaneously because they're still sitting there trying to carry the language of their home country back with that enthusiasm, and that voice means something. That audio voice, if you hear Dick Vitale and you grew up in that generation, you can close your eyes and still hear it. Right. And that's really hard to repeat with technology today, but it is going to get there. There's no doubt about it. Language should not be a barrier to entry for any sport at all today.
I'll also just say, we're talking about that part of it too, but think about the broadcast itself, and that's going out there and it's produced by whoever the producing, or the distributor is. Now let's use golf for an example. PGA Tour, they are producing their own content. No longer are their distribution partners doing it; they are doing it themselves, right? And then giving that to the distributors to get out into the world. you're still somewhat beholden to the infrastructure and the modus operandi for production, which is the big OB trucks, right? And you're cabling and you're sending people and schlepping equipment and all of that. Once we're seeing a lot of folks in this space moving to cloud production, because that then enables them to put it out there and get distributed everywhere. And if you take PGA Tour, for example, and what they did with the players with every shot live, right? They're every single hole. I think, what did Michael Raimondo tell me from the PGA Tour? I think it's only like 15% of the shots are actually televised, right? Because if you think about it, 18 holes per 152 whatever golfers, you're not, that's a lot of time, right? So they're selectively curating that broadcast, following the leaderboard and everything else. But let's say you lived in Scandinavia and Victor Hovland for the leaderboard. Well, to make that broadcast resonate in your market, you would have to be following Victor Hovland, right? So if you've got that production in the cloud, all that content's available, the Scandinavian broadcasters can say, yeah, I'm going to follow the leaderboard, but I'm also going to cut in every single one of Hovland's shots, right? And that will make what may have had some people tune in and more people tune in because the hometown heroes in this game. I can make this more germane to my audience. So that's really interesting too, when you start letting using technology to enable regionalized broadcasts that will be more resonant and therefore hopefully create and reinforce fandom for a particular property. So I just think that's an interesting innovation in the space too.
Absolutely. And I'm going to pick one more question just out of the chat because a few have come in also related to personalization. So a question came in: should we take an approach with the consumers of personalization to the level where you get a certain amount of content, either some dollar amount worth of value of content or total, megabytes streamed of content, but the user has more control over what they consume? Now, obviously, being able to pick and choose depends on what the service you're watching has rights to be actually broadcast. But this idea of personalization with the user more in control, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think you want to go back to the way we used to use cell phones, which was bill me by the minute, and based on what I consume. I don't think we want to go back there, right? There's a lot of lessons learned there. So personalization is going to come down to their experience, but it's not going back to just bill me for what there's not going to be an a la carte model. There's too many licensing rights involved, right? So you're going to pay a licensing fee across different platforms if you want to see sports holistically. It just is what it is, right? The big leagues, whether it's NBA or NHL or Major League Soccer, obviously all in on Apple. We'll see how it all plays out, right? But you're going to pay, if you like sports in different genres and different leagues, you're going to pay multiple fees. The question is, are you going to have two different experiences when you go watch an NHL game and then you go watch an NBA game? And is the personalization going to be completely different because there's not an aggregator sitting in between that aggregates your personal experience? Now you've got an NHL experience, now you got an NBA experience, now you have an NCAA experience, right? And now, once again, we're back to the consumer. Can the consumer manage three different experiences, even though their passion is there, right? Honestly, with me, a couple of kids in their teenage years, I don't have time to manage my personalization on 4 different platforms, right? I'm going to lean into one that is my most passionate. I'm going to lean into that one, get super personalized. And the other 3 are going to be like as much as I could while I was watching, right? And that's just the state of the industry. As the maturity curve comes up, there's going to be long-term ways to carry yourself from, each destination. And then it leads to the metaverse. Right, I happened to fortunately be on the board of a company that launched the first Major League Baseball metaverse, which was for the Atlanta Braves, right? And so now we just created this metaverse environment for the Braves. So now they've got their OTT, they got their metaverse, they got their linear broadcast, they got their in-game experiences. So there's just becoming more environments, and how you tie those together and how you personalize those is going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Absolutely. I've got 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll jump back to some of the questions from our attendees. Julie, when we spoke prior to the session, I know you had some perspectives on both all the great things that are already happening and that have already been developed within the sports streaming space, but you also have some thoughts on what still needs to be done, and what should be happening that maybe is not, we're not quite there yet, or certain innovations that have not yet been brought to market. Can you maybe talk a little bit about your perspectives on sort of where we go from here?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it I mentioned. It's just we haven't really taken full advantage of the platforms that these streaming products are being delivered on, right? And the interactivity and engagement. So, you know, I do think we're coming from a one-to-many world, right? Linear distribution was one pipe to as many people as possible, and it had to be the least offensive broadcast to as many people as possible, right? That was sort of the restriction of the linear world. In streaming, it can be, people can choose their own adventure, right? They can choose to watch Thursday Night Football with Prime Vision, with all the analytics and Sam Schwartzstein breaking it down and all of that. You could choose to watch Dude Perfect call the game, right? You could choose, you know, it's somewhat limitless, the permutations of this, whether we're talking about, like we said, the Toy Story version of the NFL or something like that, right? So I think that there's all that creativity that can still be unleashed as we think about how do we leverage, you know, whatever it is, if you're a stats geek, or if you're, you know, into betting, or you are, you know, into a particular, like cartoon or whatever, and you want to bring that experience in there. I also think, you know, you could start, if you go down that personalization rabbit hole and you say, I'm a really big fan of NBA and that's where I'm going to spend my time, and I am going to set this up to be, you know, my personalized, you know, produced viewing experience. Maybe you're saying, I want to, you know, have every time there's a breakaway dunk, the top of the screen turns into thunder and lightning, the ball becomes the hammer of Thor as it's jammed through the hoop, and, you know, confetti cannons go off virtually, right? But then, you know, I was talking to a customer who was thinking about, hey, how do we sort of transcend like the digital and bring it personal? So if it's a break and we're doing the t-shirt cannon in the venue, can Uber just show up with a t-shirt for a super fan, right, at somebody's house and drop that off? I mean, it's interesting where you start thinking about moving in and out of these different worlds, if you will, right? I still think there's just so much potential there from an interactive perspective. And I think the important part is not throwing it at everybody and saying, this is how you must consume it. I think that customer choice, that fan choice, is absolutely the way it needs to go. Because I think you're starting to see, if you talk about sports data, when that first started emerging and getting a little bit more popular, people were like, oh, wow, this is sort of like a little too heady for me. I don't want to lean into this space. But more and more, it's just an expectation, right? To understand what was the probability of that receiver catching that. I want to know that. I expect to know that. Think about things like the yellow line in football, right? That was a development. When I took my kids to their first University of Michigan football game, my youngest son was like, where's the yellow line? Like, he was just utterly like perplexed as to what he was seeing here. Like, how do I know it's first down, where the first down line is, right? And so these are things that at the time were sort of jarring and then became very, very mainstream. And I think you're going to start to see people experiment, and then you'll find, to Chance's point, things that resonate on a broader level that can be brought into that linear broadcast too, right? But I think there's so mumuch room to continue to play and experiment. And when the fan is opting in and you're collecting data about them and really understanding when did they double click? When did they walk away? How long did they stay? What else did they do? I think that helps us just take all of that data and put that into a product development wheel to continue to super serve fans. And that's the goal, right? Serving fans.
Absolutely. There was a relevant question in the chat just around if you believe, or if we believe there is room for small leagues to innovate in their streaming offerings, and I guess that brings up a related question just around, you know, how are these innovations being developed and funded, right? And is it providers like AWS and Viewlift that are sort of proactively developing solutions entirely funded on their side versus, kind of jointly funding new innovations with rights owners and media companies. So maybe you could just speak to the first question. Do you think there's room for small leagues to innovate when it comes to sports streaming? Chance, do you want to maybe go first on that one? Take that one.
Yeah, I think 100%. There's absolutely innovation available from the leagues that are new entry. I mean, there's a flag football league that is entering the market at a professional level, right? They are going to put in production quality that will be at the level that everyone expects, right? And there's going to be stats tracking, things of that nature. So I'm 100% that the new entrants are actually could be super disruptive, right? And they can finally maybe change the economics a little bit of what people feel like they can charge for some of these subscription packages. So I think the new entrants, I'm behind them 1,000%, right? Because I think they disrupt the market as a whole, and that is super good, right? For the industry. It's why AWS has its startup group, right? That's in there looking for these startups that have wind behind their sails, that actually can, make traction in an area of sports that's very hard. I love all these volleyball leagues popping up. I'm not saying they're all going to survive, but I love that they're all popping up, and it's primarily around women's volleyball. And the next thing you know, it's going to be everywhere. Maybe 2 leagues survive, maybe 4 survive. But again, they're going to survive, and they're going to have their niche audiences. And the younger generations, again, the challenge with the big brands and the big leagues is they're trying to find ways to connect with the next generation to maintain that level of commitment that we all have to the NBA, to the NHL, to all of these leagues. Our commitment is there, right? They're different generations. Like I said, there's like 4 in the workforce. How do you deal with those different generations and make sure that your messaging and your service meets their needs? So it's a lot on the research side. This is not all about technology, right? Because technology can move as fast as we want it to move, and we can innovate as fast as we can innovate. It's affordability of the technology that gets passed down to the consumer. And I think that's the balance we're going through, along with rights. Right? I think Evan just jumped in there. He was about to cut us off or something.
He might be. That might have been. That might have been our 5-minute warning. So just in the last couple of minutes that we have here. There was a question around, is the Walmart, if the Walmart Vizio deal goes through, will that technology be developed for broadcast TV as well as online streaming? So speaking specifically about technology of e-commerce on TV while viewing.
I would think so. I think that's the point,
there.
Right?
Yep, there.
Yeah, 100%. And we at AWS have experimented in that space too, right? So I absolutely think that's part of the plan there, and I think that's what's sort of exciting about it. But actually, Matt, you're expert in this space too. What do you think?
100%. That's the driver, right? I mean, that's why they're buying these platforms, is to get access to drive e-commerce and transactions. And the question is, how much content can they license or produce that makes it attractable to go to that destination where they present that commerce opportunity, right? And that's the hard part, right? It's cool to have a connected device that's in X amount of households, et cetera, but they've got to have a reason to turn on a piece of content to your product or your solution, which is why the rights are super high, because everybody's trying to fight for their eyeballs. But then this is where the niche players may come involved, and Walmart may clean up the niche markets and say, okay, we'll go take, these 20 leagues that have aggregated audience that's super important, and we'll focus on that because it's underserved, and we'll drive our e-commerce through that, right? Or they make it more affordable, right? We know there's skinny bundles coming out, right? There's skinny bundles under, I guess PR lawsuits, right? There's all of this is still going to play out, and it creates a lot of confusion right now for the end user, because behind the scenes the business transactions still are being done.
Yep. Well, I totally agree with that, and I'll maybe pivot to one final question and potentially a controversial one, and we'll see if anyone's brave enough to weigh in here. But the question, and we were actually just talking about this right before we jumped on, what are your thoughts about Fubo suing to stop Disney, Fox, Warner Brothers Discovery's new sports streaming service. I'm going to recluse myself from answering for client-related reasons, but Julie or Chance, are you either of you so bold as to comment or try to answer this one?
I just have questions, right? I think we all do. I think it's interesting to see, like we said, we have this whole aggregated model in cable, and then everybody wanted to go a la carte, and now the pendulum's swinging back towards aggregation. I think for me, I still have so many questions about this, and I'm excited to learn more and see where it goes. I think it's too early to tell.
Yeah, so I second that, and it's not because I wouldn't be bold enough to share my personal opinion outside of my association with ViewLift as it relates to that, but I think there's still too much unknown, right? It's a very broad statement at this point, and whether this gets down to what I'm paying versus what somebody else is paying, or you're trying to create monopolies, or I have no idea what's going on in the background, and so I think we have to give it time to play out, and then once it plays out, I think it'll be a pretty easy decision on which side you lean on. But again, I mean, there's other folks that are out there that have put forward direct to consumer offerings that have now said they're going to become technology providers, right? And they're going to replace and provide technology to the RSNs, but they were arena owners, right? That may have owned a team or a couple of teams or a couple of networks, and now they're trying to get into the space. It is not that easy. The ecosystem that it takes to pull this off is significant, and it all has to work seamlessly together. There is no end-to-end providers in this industry. We all have dependencies on one another, and the best of breed technologies that fall in the gaps where we can't innovate because either we don't have the budgets, the resources, the time, the talent, etc. This is a game where, as ViewLift, from a provider perspective, we do certain things very well, and we believe it's best of breed. But again, this is an ecosystem play, and it's much bigger than ViewLift. It's even bigger than AWS, which is really hard to say, right? Because they're the gorilla in the market. But there are these other entrants, and there's all these other influences that are going to play into this.
Excellent. Well, the clock just struck 11 here in the East. So Julie and Chance, thank you so much for your time, for your perspectives. To the 60 plus folks who joined us here this morning, thank you. And Evan, I'll maybe pass it back to you for closing remarks.
Yeah, I echo that. Thank you, Julie and Chance, for a great panel. Matt, great job. Really great conversation, important one at this moment in time. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around. The walk-up music at the beginning was The Who's Sparks. The winner is Clay Lambert. Congratulations, Clay. You are the winner of a $50 gift certificate from Amazon. Our next panel, I'm actually moderating. It's called The Fast Track, Measuring Fast Success in 2024. I posted a bunch of data from Amagi on LinkedIn earlier today. So if you want to check out that data, we're going to be discussing that at length. It's a great panel. It's at, what time is it? It's at 11:30. We will see you there then. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good lunch.